Thank you, Deputy Speaker. I rise this evening to talk about the Occupational Licensing Amendment Bill 2026, and I can sincerely say that I'm very thankful to the government for bringing this to the Parliament today. Opposition can be quite tough, Deputy Speaker. It's not often that you feel like you can get an outcome for constituents, but every now and then, because of good grace and a fair tailwind, you can get a win, and I'm counting this as a win for me. This all started for me, I brought to the Parliament back in the estimates process in 2024, where I sat across the table and Michael Ferguson was the Minister at the time, and I talked about the horrendous circumstances of two people I know quite well, Tasha Jordan and Ken Belbin, and how their lives were ruined by a business on the northwest that has a history of phoenixing and uses phoenixing as a business model. And that is the owners of Golden Homes and a number of other businesses that have also phoenixed. Now, I'm very sorry to Tasha and Ken that I can't fix the devastation that's happened to their lives because of this phoenixing as a business model. However, I can say that a large part of this bill today is because of them and because of the goodwill from the government to actually make progress. I remember very clearly, and I'm very thankful to Michael Ferguson for the way that he took the story and the circumstances of Tasha and Ken to heart and made a commitment to me that he would actually sit down with me and do something about it. And he did. He honoured his promise. Unfortunately for Mr Ferguson, he resigned, well, unfortunately for this whole process really, he resigned as a minister only a few months after that. Subsequent to that, I had a number of conversations with the new minister, who was Felix Ellis, who also I know had representations from Tasha at least, and had actually been to the site of the building, which is the building itself, which I'll get into in a minute or two, is a complete disgrace. The way that house was constructed. And I know, and I thank Felix also, Mr Ellis also, for taking this on. And I also thank Guy Barnett, the current minister, for actually bringing this to the Parliament today. So it's been 3 ministers and a couple of years, but to see this here today makes me very pleased. So just to give you a few details about what happened to Tasha and Ken. So Golden Homes had a business model of phoenixing. So they started off, I think, they've had a number of off-the-shelf companies ready to go. They're very clever at this. They're very good at designing businesses and business names and a whole structure that enables this phoenixing type operation. So they first hit the northwest coast that I'm aware of as Easy Way Homes, and then they went into bankruptcy and left a number of people in dire circumstances around a development in Burnie, a subdivision where people lost their things like their land deposits. And then they moved on, created a new business called Golden Homes, and that's where Tasha and Ken unfortunately came into contact with these operators. So it looks like what they did was they borrowed a builder's licence, got someone who was just a builder who was just out of his apprenticeship to build a house. And this is in a new area where there's houses going up everywhere. And all the builders, so Tasha works in a business where people, they come in quite regularly, and the builders were talking about how this house was being built and how it just wasn't right. This house is just not right, they said. Now, anybody with even just a vague understanding of building would actually understand what these builders were concerned about. There were things that were happening in the construction of that house that absolutely just wasn't right. One of the, for a start, when they started construction of the house, they started on the wrong block. So you've got pegs in the ground that go there and there, there and there. So instead of going straight up and down the block, they went off on an angle and they started digging a trench, and then they realised they were in the wrong spot, so they just kept digging that trench. And what they actually did was created a de facto French drain. They're on a hill. This French drain basically, and subsequently to the construction, channels groundwater into their basement and creates mould and you know, the groundwater just builds up underneath the house, and it's just horrendous. But the most visual thing was when this house was being constructed, there was a veranda. So the front door, there's a big veranda and steps that go up to it where the entrance of the house is. And what the builder did was he bricked up without engineering approval, bricked up about 2 or so metres, built a deck on top of the bricks. So built a deck on top of the bricks, and then what he did was he bricked up from the top of the deck to the roof to hold up the roof that's over the top of this deck. So you've got bricks, you've got a flat deck that goes all the way across, so no connection between the bricks at the bottom and the bricks at the top, and then went up to the top of the roof. So all the builders are going, this is just crazy. This is just crazy. How is this happening? This house is just not right. And that was only just a number. This is only just the start of all the issues. You know, all the waterproofing in the shower was done. You know, they left massive gaps which they just siliconed up and then tiled over the top of. You know that that's going to fail, and it has failed. And then, you know, the other unfortunate part of this is that the building surveyor signed off on everything. So, which is another incredible story. And I know CBOS knows about this, and I know CBOS knows about these operators. A lot of people know about these operators, but it's unfortunate we have a system where these operators haven't actually been faced severe consequences, both financial, and I think that there's a case here for them to be prosecuted and made an example of, because it is horrendous what they've done. So basically they've got a house now, and it has destroyed them. It's destroyed them financially. This is a house that more than likely should be demolished and started again. They had to do massive upgrades to be able to actually move into this house. It's just incredible. So now they've got a house that they can't insure, that they can't sell. They're paying for it. They've only just been able to move into, and it has destroyed their lives. It has destroyed their lives, and it is because of this business model. So what they did, obviously they went to CBOS, they went to everybody, they got reports. People who look at this are just outraged by just the blatant building faults, and I would argue this phoenixing business model where they just don't care. And so what they've done, they got some money out of the process, I think, from CBOS. They went to their lawyers and they took Golden Homes to court. And they went through that whole process and blew all their savings on a court decision, and the court ruled in their favour. And then what happened? Declared bankruptcy. Golden Homes declared bankruptcy. So after all this process, all this pain, all this hurt, the end of the road is they're bankrupt. Golden Homes, the builder withdrew his licence. That was probably the step. The builder withdrew his licence. They became insolvent. They went into administration. And one of the things is that the administrator's report said that Golden Homes was basically insolvent, trading insolvent right from the get-go. Because what they were doing is they were dragging all the money out of Golden Homes the whole time to a related party. This is part of their business model. So these are the sorts of things that we just have to eliminate in Tasmania, because a house is normally the biggest investment that people will make in their lives. And there are predators out there, like these people running Golden Homes, that ruin people's lives. And their impact on Tasha and Ken will go on for decades, no doubt, as they struggle with their financial situation. And I'm sorry I can't fix it for them. I think we also need laws to go after them. These people are using a business model, a predatory business model, and no doubt they're trading again. And I think if you go into the research on these individuals, there is a prima facie case for using insolvency and phoenixing as a business model, and I think, you know, they should bear the full force of the law, because there's no doubt that there's been horrendous, if not fraudulent, operation. That's the sort of impact that this bill can have. Now, there are good builders out there. there are absolutely good builders in Tasmania. The problem is that these dodgy operations give everybody a bad name. We need more houses built. We need people to have confidence that when they enter into a building contract, that it will be a good process, that there are checks and balances, and that they won't have a dodgy builder do a dodgy job and then go bankrupt and then pop up a week later with a different business name. Now, that's what this Occupational Licensing Amendment Bill does. I know the minister has flagged, or didn't flag in his second reading speech, but his advisor has suggested there's a couple of amendments. I know the HIA, who are supportive of this legislation, would like to see a couple of amendments. First amendment is around the review period. The review period in this bill is quite long. I think it's 5 years. So bringing that back to 3 years, I understand, which actually is a good thing. And the reason why I think reviewing it in that 3 years, I think the HIA wanted it shorter than that. They probably wanted, I think it was 18 months they were asking for. 3 years is a good period of time for a number of reasons. First, this bill gets enacted, it gets put in place. Houses take 12 to 18 months to get constructed. So, it'll take a period of time before there are potentially any instances, although this isn't retrospective, but I imagine that if somebody is actually doing really dodgy stuff right now, that they might get captured earlier than that. But the concern for me, and the reason why I'd support an earlier time frame, is because the people like the operators of Golden Homes are very clever at working out ways around this type of legislation. So they could be an influential person. So there's a collective of influential people who set up one company in their name, and then they might trade until they become insolvent and then shift assets before the insolvency to a related organisation, related parties, who then phoenix and they start up, and then the others sit back and wait until they've served their period of suspension before they start again. So I think maybe there is the potential for these very clever, in a not very clever way, could potentially find ways to get around this anti-phoenixing legislation. So having an earlier review, I think, is a good thing. And the other side of it is around applying Section 93 of the original Act, which is another review mechanism. And I also support that, so I look forward to seeing those amendments come through. Because there is another side to this too. There are people who can become insolvent, go bankrupt through no fault of their own. An example of that might be, let's just make something up, a plumber who has a major contract, has done $100,000 worth of work for a company, and that company has stretched their payments and then becomes, declares bankruptcy, and so that because they've lost that $100,000, then they too have to declare bankruptcy through no fault of their own, simply because of this snowballing effect. And I know, for example, that Golden Homes absolutely stretched all their creditors, and there's a trail of destruction for a whole bunch of bills that they haven't paid, and it wasn't just Tasha Jordan and Ken Belbin impacted, it was a whole bunch of people. So I think if there are instances of people who that declare bankruptcy through no fault of their own, through their circumstances, there is an appeal right, that they can get their period of suspension reduced. Another example might be the partner of a builder who is a part of a partnership, for example, and becomes bankrupt because their partner becomes bankrupt, or a guarantor. Or there are circumstances where people can become bankrupt through no fault of their own. So I think having this appeal mechanism is a good one, and adding another layer to the appeal mechanism is also good, because you do need checks and balances. There are arguments on both sides. This bill is a good one. I'm very pleased that the government has brought it today. I'm very pleased that Michael Ferguson, in the first instance, actually wasn't just trying to get through estimates. He actually took what I explained to him and the circumstances that I explained to him to heart. He made a commitment to follow up, and he definitely did, and I really appreciate that. I think that every now and then there are things that we can work on through both sides of this parliament, and we can actually have good outcomes for the people of Tasmania, that we can all sit together, work together so that we can make life better and we can make sure that there aren't another Tasha and Ken out there. So thank you, Michael Ferguson. Thank you, Felix Ellis. Thank you, Guy Barnett. I commend the bill to the House.
Honourable Speaker.